Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As usual, I want to remind everybody, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. So as you can see from the title, yes, this is going to be another episode about immigration. After listening back to last week's episode, I felt like I still had a couple things that I wanted to say. I didn't quite get out everything that I wanted to say in that one. So I wanted to revisit the topic today. And I know the Supreme Court did all of the things yesterday, and so therefore nobody wants to talk about immigration or the children in the cages anymore. But damn it, I still want to talk about it, and this is my podcast, and I get to talk about what I want. So we're going to do another episode on immigration, even though nobody else wants to talk about it right now. I still do. Let's start with going over some of the developments that have happened since last week. First off, Jeff Sessions came out and tried to walk this back and kind of be like, well, shucks, we didn't mean to separate families. That wasn't the point of this. Which, yes, it was, you fucking Keebler elf looking motherfucker. That's exactly what the point of zero tolerance is. So we had that. We've also got Congress, who has once again failed to pass any kind of immigration reform bill. There was one in the House that died, and so obviously I guess Congress is still not particularly interested in solving this problem. And then Trump had actually tweeted out that Congress should not bother dealing with this until after the midterms, but then tweeted yelling at them for not getting anything done, which is typical Trump. But yeah, it looks like at this point, Congress cannot get their shit together enough to actually do their jobs on immigration reform. So I guess we're just still going to be in a stalemate on that. Speaking of Trump tweets, Trump managed to tweet out what is possibly the dumbest possible thing you could say about this situation. And I'm just going to read the tweet verbatim. We cannot allow all these people to invade our country. Capital C on country. When someone comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came. Our system is a mockery to good immigration policy and law and order. Most children come without parents. Which shows that I don't know if Trump is thoroughly aware of the idea of due process, and that sending people back without due process violates, I don't know, the Constitution, various other laws and statutes, international treaties that are in place saying how you treat asylum seekers. And yes, everybody, due process applies to everybody if they're on American soil, whether or not they're citizens. There's no clause that vouches for that. So yes, the Fourth Amendment applies here. But of course everybody had to go point that out too. But just the fact that he tweeted out that we can, or he seems to be under the impression that we can deny people due process in this, especially asylum seekers, is a little troubling. Another thing that's particularly troubling is that nobody seems to have come up with a way to logistically enforce zero tolerance. There's currently a court order right now for Trump to start reuniting families ASAP, but there still is no methodology in place for getting kids back to their parents. And as far as enforcing zero tolerance is concerned, the Department of Justice says that that's still on the table. Border Patrol seems to have a different idea on this. But nobody seems to be concerned with figuring out if we are going to do zero tolerance, how exactly is this going to work as far as not separating families? Nobody's come up with any way to square that circle because, like I said in the last podcast, if you're going to do zero tolerance and not break up families, you still have that 20-day threshold that you run up against. And I know there's been filing in court to see if they can lift that, and I've not heard anything about it since then, so I'm going to assume that's a no-go. So, I mean, how exactly is this going to work? It's not going to work, let's just put it that way. But nobody seems to be interested in coming up with concrete solutions to make it work. So, that's kind of where we're at with that. And then I'll go ahead and segue from that into the Time magazine cover. And apparently there's going to be a story accompanying this. I'm sure everybody's already heard about this by now, but the cover of Time, which I believe is going to be the one that's on newsstands July 2nd, is a cover. There's this picture of this little girl and she's crying, and it's cropped out of a larger picture. And then there's a picture of Trump staring down at her. But the picture of the little girl in question, When the photographer took it, I'm sure he took it in good faith and assumed that, of course, that this was a child that was being separated from her mother, because it's at one of the detention facilities. And so obviously if you see a child down on the ground crying, you make the obvious assumption. But as it turns out, the child's father came forward and said, no, she was never separated from her mother. And her mother is here trying to find work, not really trying to seek asylum. And so this whole situation has kind of been portrayed in a way that's not completely true and realistic. And of course, this has been pointed out at the time. And for what I understand, the cover story kind of runs along that same line of this being like actual fact, like this child was separated from her mother. And their response has been that basically it really doesn't matter if it's true or not, because it kind of captures the spirit of what's going on. And as far as I know, there's no plans on retracting the cover or the cover story itself. So that's kind of like, there's enough situations here. There's enough legitimate stories that Time could have picked that would have been 100% factually accurate, that would have completely conveyed the horror of this situation. So this idea that you're still going to go with this kind of fabricated story when you could actually just go find an actual story of a child that's been separated from their parents. I'm sure you could find a picture that would greatly represent that. And so that's kind of like, it makes me think that Time really isn't taking this situation as seriously as they are portraying themselves to. Because kind of going with it in this way just kind of looks more like propaganda and less like you actually give a shit what's going on. Because like I said, there's plenty of stories they could pick. Like, you don't have to fabricate a story on this. It's bad enough that, like, you can find something. But as I said earlier, it is supposed to be the July 2nd, on newsstands July 2nd, so it's going to be that edition. So we shall see when it hits newsstands, what it ends up being. Maybe they will change it, maybe they won't. Like I said, I've not heard any talk that they will. But that kind of sums up everything that's happened since last week. Basically, nothing's been resolved. There's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of people very concerned and doing very showy, flashy things to show their concern. But nobody's actually doing anything to resolve the situation. Okay, moving on from all that into kind of the points that I meant to make last week but didn't, and kind of evolved thoughts on this and kind of more stuff I wanted to talk about. The first thing I want to go back to is the whole concept of the zero tolerance policy, which, like I said, I have no fucking clue how this is going to be implemented going forward. I mean, there's the Trump EO that says that families can't be broken up, but then logistically speaking, I don't know exactly how you're going to enforce that. But what zero tolerance was before the executive order was basically an idea of inflicting the maximum amount of pain on one group of people to dissuade another group of people from doing something. That really bothers me because that's basically government-sanctioned sadism. Like, you're deliberately hurting people in the worst way that you could possibly fucking hurt somebody, which is by taking their kids and putting them somewhere else, not telling you where they're at, not letting you talk to them, and you're doing that on purpose to create a certain environment that dissuades other people from coming here. Like, that was the whole point of zero tolerance. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, wait a minute. Making an example of one group of people to send a message to another group of people, you know who else does that? Gangs do that. Drug cartels do that. MS-13 does that. When you do that, you're engaging in gang-style activities, which the U.S. government just fucking did that to people. These people, MS-13, they're bad people, obviously. Drug cartels are not warm fuzzies. They're some of the worst, most horrible, vicious people on the planet. And you guys in the government came up with a plan to act exactly like them. Like, I don't feel like there's been enough attention paid to that. Just the open sadisticness of the whole idea behind zero tolerance. And I want to talk about it because it's really, really fucked up. Like, there's ways that you could have did this without continually hurting people because these families are still broken up. These kids are still God knows where. There's no reunification plan really on the table. So this was done it's horrible. Like, it's such a horrible thing to have done to people. And like I said, I don't think enough attention has been paid to that aspect of it. The other thing that really bothered me, and it kind of ramped up even more so since the last recording I did, until yesterday the Supreme Court just washed away everything on Twitter in just fire and blood and liberal tears, is the whataboutism on this. And the first one I want to talk about is the Obama did it whataboutism, which I gotta say yes and no on that one. Like, yes, obviously families were split up under Obama, but it wasn't done with this intent that zero tolerance had. So I can't really do a real moral equivalence on that one. I mean, I'm not saying that Obama's immigration policies were good. They were shitty as hell. But I see this kind of thrown out there as a way to try to shut down conversation. Like, well, Obama did it too. So, like, okay, yes, Obama did it. Immigration policy has been really shitty in this country for a long time. Maybe let's go ahead and start talking about it now, because this is the opportunity we have right now. So I don't like this, like, trying to shut down conversations about this. I mean, it's what's past is past, and none of us can go back and change it. But trying to use the past to shut down current conversation just seems incredibly counterproductive to me. And then as for the whole you didn't care when Obama did it thing, first off, yeah, there was a lot of us who did care when Obama did it. And a lot of us tried to talk about it. But of course, this was not something that the media was going to report on, because of course Obama was the magical unicorn god that did no wrong. And so obviously we couldn't talk about his shit immigration policy. And the fact that a lot of this that is going on now is a continuation of his policies, which is a continuation of Bush's policies, which, I mean, the whole immigration problem goes back decades on decades on decades. And there's a lot of finger pointing you can do. You can blame Congress, you can blame various presidents, you can blame political parties, but that doesn't get to the point of how do we solve this going forward. And yes, the media does deserve some critique for this, because they did ignore this under the Obama administration. And in fact, the whole way that this came up was that journalists started circulating pictures that were from anywhere from 2014 to 2016 and ascribing them to current day, which, again, ladies and gentlemen, always check your timestamps and your date stamps before posting. But that kind of shows that, I mean, obviously we all know that they were in the bag for Obama, and I wish this was reported during the Obama administration. But there's nothing we can do about that right now, unless somebody has a time machine where we can go back and we can force the media to talk about this during the Obama administration. Arguing about how they didn't cover this, it's like, okay, we know that. We get it. But that's not, like, this is where we're at right now. There's nothing we can do about that. All we can do is going forward to keep talking about this and to keep pushing the issue. And yeah, that's about all we can do. We can't fix what was or was not done during the 8 Obama years. I mean, we have this moment right now. We can have this discussion now. Forget about what was and wasn't done. Let's go forward. Let's have this discussion. And then the other strain of whataboutism that really is bothering me is this kind of accusation being thrown out at people that, oh, because you don't care about this happening other places, that your outrage about it happening here is somehow fake. And this is an area that I think is a really huge libertarian blind spot. And that's us assuming that everybody else knows the things that we know. And most people don't. Like, most people are not listening to Dave Smith's podcast or Scott Horton's interviews to know about Syria and Yemen and the situations over there. I mean, most people are not reading Reason magazine to know about the breaking up of families through nonviolent offenses and people getting jailed. Like, for most people, they get their news from the nightly local news, and that's all they know. So this coming at people with this, oh, well, you don't care about this, so you really don't care about that, is just a really, really bad stance to take as libertarians, I think. And I would rather view this as a teachable moment for other people. So tell them, like, okay, this is bad, but there's also these things going on in other places that you may not know about. Let me teach you about them. So instead of coming off on this defensive posture, like, let's just take a step back, take a deep breath, and not assume that people are coming at this with ill intent, but just ignorance of a situation. And as kind of an offshoot of us thinking that everybody knows what we know, another kind of part of that libertarian blind spot is thinking that other people think about things in the same way we do. And I say this in, like, thinking about domestic policy, and kind of, obviously, like, anybody who sits down and thinks about it can be like, yes, jailing people for nonviolent offenses breaks up families needlessly. But your average person doesn't, like, really sit down and, like, think that one through. So again, this can kind of be one of those teachable moments where it's like, yes, the breaking up of families is horrible. We also do this through jailing people through non-violent drug offenses, or jailing people for sex work, or for any of the million other petty-ass things that you can get locked up for. That breaks up families too. So to kind of create that situation in people's brains where it's like, oh shit, this is a bad thing that we do in this country. Because like I said, most people don't sit down and think about this kind of stuff the way we do. Most people just kind of go through their day, they live their life, and they're not really, like, thinking about the minutia of American domestic policy as it turns to breaking up families through nonviolent offenses. So I feel like just maybe dial it down a notch, and this might be a good way to try to start spreading the idea of libertarianism to people who are not libertarians, to kind of take this stance and take this moment of being like, okay, this bad thing is happening. Let me tell you about the other bad things that are happening, and hopefully you will care about them as much as you care about this other thing. I feel like this would be the best way going forward to kind of spread libertarianism, and that's kind of beyond the scope of this particular episode of this podcast. I might do that later, but maybe just take a softer tone, just dial it down a notch, and don't assume that people know what you know or think about things the way that you think about them. Alright, moving on from that, and hard pivot alert. I do not know how the fuck I did not talk about this in the last episode. I don't know how the hell I mentioned Cuba and Cubans and not mentioned the Mariel boatlift, because I was actually thinking about it before taping of the last episode, and like I said, I don't know what fucking brain fart came over me that I forgot completely to mention the Mariel boatlift, which, if you don't know about it, this is immigration history lesson time. I will explain it to you. Fair warning, I just had to take my phone out of airplane mode to do this, so if it makes a noise, I am sorry, but pro tip for everybody who does this, everybody who podcasts, put your phone in airplane mode before recording. It'll save you a lot of trouble. But basically, back to the boatlift. Little bit of backstory. Through a series of events that happened in Cuba, they had a very sharp economic downturn. What ended up happening, and this is kind of like the condensed version of this, Cubans started going to embassies on the island, like the Venezuelan one, the Peruvian one, we'll talk about that in a second, and through ways sometimes a little more peaceful and nonviolent than other ways. Sometimes they just went to the gates and asked to be let in. Some people drove vans through gates. But what ended up happening is Cubans started trying to seek refuge on these embassies. So the one that kind of ended up getting overrun the most was the Peruvian embassy, because Peru had decided that they would take these people in, and then because they decided to take the people in, Cuba decided that, well, if you're going to do that, we're not going to protect your embassy anymore. So it became this situation where Cubans found out that they can go to the Peruvian embassy. There was not going to be any Cuban military forces there to stop them from going in. So it got to the point where 10,000-ish people were living at the Peruvian embassy in Cuba, which obviously an embassy is not meant to hold 10,000 people. I mean, it's maybe a couple hundred people max. So this was starting to create a bit of a sanitary problem. Not to mention it was kind of becoming a little bit of an embarrassment to Fidel, I would assume. But that's kind of what ended up happening there. So because of that situation and there's people seeking asylum of that other embassies, Fidel decided in a fit of, I'm not sure what, of anger, of embarrassment, of just not giving a fuck what these people do. He basically said, okay, anybody who wants to leave can leave peacefully if you go to the port of Mariel and you can find somebody to pick you up from there and take you wherever the hell it is you want to go. You can go. I'm not going to stop you. And almost 125,000 Cubans took him up on that. So how it went down is word got out within Cuba on the island itself because it wasn't really announced to Cubans. It was announced to people in the U.S. mainland. So people from U.S. mainland, expats, Cuban Americans, private groups, basically it was all private individuals and private groups, chartered boats, got down to the port of Mariel and started picking these people up and bringing them back to the U.S. So that happened, bring the people here, and what we ended up doing is the U.S. government didn't actually go pick up anybody. The Coast Guard, the Navy, the Marines offered assistance to these people, like if you needed humanitarian assistance. And oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, it's really the correct thing to do. Everybody that was kind of involved military-wise ended up getting like humanitarian service medals for their work doing this. But so that's what people did. Private individuals, private groups went down, picked up these Cuban immigrants, brought them back. The U.S. set up processing areas, and the situation kind of went down pretty much the same way that asylum seekers do now. Like they went to the processing centers, got checked out for, diseases, got their backgrounds checked, everything. And if you checked out, you got sent to a detention center where you waited until somebody came to pick you up, like a family member or relatives or stuff like that. And yeah, that's how that went down. There was actually like a flotilla of private people went and picked up Cuban refugees and brought them to the U.S. And this was all considered very legal and above board because, like I said in the last episode, Cubans back then had a protected status. They were automatically considered political refugees and asylum seekers, obviously, on top of that. So there wasn't this big, to-do about what to do with them because there was already a situation, in place. Obviously, they're asylum seekers. We know what to do with them. Another interesting part of the boat lift is just the sheer amount of people that was brought in such a short amount of time. The policy was only in effect from the 15th of April to the 31st of October of 1980. And I'm going to scroll down. I'm looking at this on Wikipedia because I want to give you the exact numbers and to just kind of just the sheer number of people that were processed in such a short amount of time. So they have it listed for April, which actually starts from the 21st of April, which is when people first started showing up. So for April, 7,665 people. May, 86,488 people. In 1 month alone, we allowed in 86,488 people and managed to process them all. June, 20,800 people. And then after that, it starts tapering off. July, 2,629. August, 3,939. September, 3,258. For a grand total, in that short amount of time, of 124,779 people. Now, I make a big deal about these numbers because our current situation is nothing like that situation. That is a staggeringly huge amount of people to process in a very short amount of time. And this idea that it can't be done, we can't process all these people and get them into the United States. Yes, obviously we fucking can because we have before. And that's a reason why I wanted to bring up the Mariel boat lift to kind of show, this has happened before. We have taken in a mass amount of immigrants, processed them, found them homes, and even going beyond that, once they're processed, obviously they went through processed people. The people that checked out clean got to go over here. The people that had records went over here. And to be honest, it did come out somewhat later that Fidel put a lot of prisoners on the boats. He put a lot of people from mental institutions on the boats, which like, the things that you could be in prison or in a mental institution for in Cuba are not things that we would necessarily consider criminal or mental problems here in the U.S. So I don't know how much of that really came into play, but basically all these people came and most of them ended up staying in the Miami area. Like, the vast majority of the processing and housing of people was in the Miami area, obviously. And most of them did stay in that area. And the local economy just absorbed them. Like, the unemployment rate went up a couple of percentage points past where the national percentage rate was for like 2 months, which means obviously these people came here. They were willing to work. The local economy apparently needed them because, I mean, if you absorbed that many people in that short a time, clearly there was a shortage of labor, which these people filled. And it's just, like I said, it's an interesting case study to look at, because it refutes a lot of the arguments that I hear coming from anti-immigration people. One thing I do want to mention, in all fairness, and I'm going to read this directly off of Wikipedia, so. The Refugee Education Assistance Act of 1980 provided $100 million in cash, medical and social services, and authorized approximately $5 million per year to facilitate the refugees' transition to American life. The 1980 census was also adjusted to include Mariel children to ensure that additional assistance would be available to them through the Miami-Dade County Public Schools via Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Assistance Act. Now, I bring that up because, yes, obviously there was government assistance given to these people, but look at these numbers. 100 million off the rip is a large number. And, I mean, I'm not a big fan of government spending, but if I look at 100 million off the rip and then 5 million a year in assistance, what we spend to keep people out of this country eclipses that by numbers that I cannot even begin to fathom. Like, we spend so much money on ICE, on Border Patrol, on these little fancy things that we do have, not even to mention if this stupid fucking wall gets built, that is going to so far eclipse what was spent in 1980 to bring these people in and to adjust them to our society, to acclimate them, to get them integrated, that it's like, I can't argue against that. Like, spending $100 million to bring people in to obviously a labor market where they were needed, and to get them adjusted and to kind of acclimate them to American society, versus the billions on billions on billions that we spend to keep immigrants out of the country. Like, this is a no-brainer from the numbers perspective. Like, this is, like, there's no comparison here. But to kind of wrap this up and move forward, I will post a link in the show notes to the Wikipedia page for the Mariel boatlift. Definitely give it a read, because like I said, it's a really fascinating account of what can be done. And honestly, I would just like to take a second and just say hooray for private individuals, private groups of individuals, voluntarism, because this is just a great example of that, of just, like I said, this wasn't the U.S. military going down and picking up people from Cuba. This was just private citizens taking of their own time and their own money to go down to Cuba, to rescue these refugees, to bring them up here. So, hooray for voluntarism. On a less chipper note, I want to talk about something that I did talk about in the last episode. And that is my problem with this othering of these people who are coming here to seek asylum. Like I said, I don't have it in me to other people. Like, I did not grow up in an environment where we othered people who were seeking asylum or just seeking to come here. But this is a trend that still seems to be continuing. And there was one tweet in particular, and I want to read it to you. The tweet says, illegal aliens, not undocumented immigrants, not immigrants, not children, not people, not human beings, etc. They're illegals. Do it the right way. End of discussion. Which I'm sorry, they're not people. They're not human beings. They're not children. Well then, first of all, what the fuck do you think they are? Second of all, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, no, these are people and they're trying to escape shitty situations, and just, there's still been a real lack of compassion out there. And I know I kind of beat this one to death on the last episode, but it does bother me to watch people view other people as something other than human just because they come from another side of this imaginary line, or they have this certain skin color, or they're trying to do this in a certain way. Like, they're still people, they're still human beings, and they're still worthy of compassion and some kind of level of decency. So, yeah, that's still going on, and it's still bothering me. So there's that. But another thing I kind of started thinking about the other day, and I'm starting to see like the nascent beginnings of this on Twitter, and that is that kind of moving past the othering campaign, because I don't know how well that's actually working in the general society. The next thing up is going to be child trafficking. You heard it here first. Mark my words. That is going to be the next argument for building the wall, is that we have to keep people from trafficking children into the United States. And I'm sure sex trafficking will get lumped in there too, but watch. Trust me, the trafficking angle is going to be the next angle that gets brought up to justify building the wall. And as far as the wall itself, I was thinking about it the other day, and I really got kind of squicked out by the idea of the wall, like, if it actually existed. Like, I was thinking about it, and obviously, historically speaking, walls have been used to keep people in just as much as they've been used to keep people out. See the Berlin Wall? But I got to thinking about, like, how weird it would be, like, if you went down to the US-Mexico border and, like, you couldn't look across the border, like, there's a wall there. Like, that just, I'm a little claustrophobic to begin with, but just the idea of the wall, I'd never really sat down and thought about it that way, and when I did, it just really, like, it really creeped me out, to be completely honest. Like, this idea that there would be a wall that I can't go past and other people can't go past. It really fucking creeped me out. Like, I can't describe it. It just seemed like so wrong on like a deep level that it would exist. And like I said, honestly, I don't see it happening, if we're being completely honest, but it's something to think about. Like, we would be a country where there would be a fucking wall on a border. Like, that's so wrong. Like, it's so creepy and weird to think about. But that, I think I'm gonna wrap this up on that, because now I'm just creeped out thinking about the damn wall again. So, let me just go ahead and wrap this up. As per usual, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Take care, and until next time.